Good evening everybody, my name is Alex and you may have noticed a few books on the desk behind me, and the reason for that is because since I've started making YouTube videos, the most common message that I've been getting is messages asking me for some book recommendations. And I usually start by naming some of the obvious choices that I thought most people would have already come across or read, but it turns out that a lot of you haven't, so I thought that I'd make this quick video outlining some of my sort of most popular book recommendations, starting at the moment with sort of basic book recommendations that I'd recommend to pretty much anybody, and hopefully in the future I'll make more regular videos about what I've been reading recently. So I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to anybody that the first book I'm going to mention is The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, not necessarily because it's the best of the bunch, but it's certainly the most popular. It can be a bit arrogant at times and doesn't have the best arguments, but it's a good overview of sort of an atheistic worldview if you're just breaking into reading books on the topic. Now the other two books that I always recommend are firstly God Is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens, a fantastic book by a fantastic writer. This copy, by the way, happens to be a first edition which was sent to me by one of my patrons, James. So James, if you're watching, thank you so much for this. This is such a nice gift. I couldn't be more appreciative. Other than that, I would always recommend Letter to a Christian Nation by Sam Harris. I think this book is particularly good for people who are religious. I mean, the other two books are great, I think, for people who are atheists. If you know somebody, or if you yourself are somebody who's willing to question their faith, especially, of course, if you're a Christian, then this book is for you. It's quite short, so you can get through it quite quickly, and I think it's a fantastic, healthy challenge to some things that you might believe. Now, of course, Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens are two of the biggest names of quote-unquote new atheism. So a few more of their books. Firstly, for Richard Dawkins, The Blind Watchmaker. This is a fantastic book, which is basically in response to the watchmaker argument, you know, William Paley's old watchmaker argument. And it's a great overview of evolution and kind of shows how an intelligent designer isn't necessary for all the weird and wonderful life that we see on our planet. Other than that, of course, The Selfish Gene was his first book, his breakthrough book, and popularized the gene-centric view of evolution, although he didn't come up with it. But again, this is a fantastic book about evolution and how moral acts can come from evolution, which would seem to favor selfish acts. It's a really interesting read. Now, while we're on the topic of evolution, Why Evolution is True by Jerry Coyne. This book kind of does what it says on the tin, really. A fantastic book for people who either aren't quite convinced of evolution themselves, or maybe you are, but you just don't quite know of all the evidence and you want to learn some to either use in debate or just to consolidate your own knowledge. This is a great book for it. It's sort of an overview of things like the fossil record, vestigial traits, many of the things that I talk about in my videos actually. So if you're looking for some kind of basis for your evolutionary arguments, this is a good place to start. And I think obviously it kind of goes without saying, Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species, you don't actually have to read this book to understand evolution. It's not necessary, and it is a bit long and mundane, so I certainly wouldn't recommend it to everybody, but it's good at least from a historical aspect. So if you're really interested in evolution, this is a good go-to book. Now I just threw those in quickly because we were talking about evolution, but back to Christopher Hitchens, Mortality. You guys know that I've raved about this book in the past. This is the last book that Christopher Hitchens wrote. He wrote it as he was dying of esophageal cancer, and it's one of the most candid looks at cancer I've ever seen. Entirely forthright, funny at times, and it has an absolutely heartbreaking ending, and anybody who's read this will know exactly what I'm talking about. I pretty much recommend it to everybody. It's probably one of my favourite books that I've ever read, so on the top of the list. If you haven't read this yet, this should probably be your next one, especially if you're a fan of Christopher Hitchens. Other than that, another short book, The Missionary Position by Christopher Hitchens. If you have any opinion of Mother Teresa, good or bad, it will probably be challenged by this book. If you've seen the documentary Hell's Angel, which is on YouTube, it has over like 1 million views. I would definitely recommend anybody to watch that, but if you enjoyed that documentary, this is sort of the book version of it, I suppose. Now, the genre that I probably read the most of, hands down, would be popular science, so I've got a few recommendations. The first one being A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. I'm sure you've heard of this. It's an absolutely classic book. But certainly if you're interested in science or the history of science, this is a great place to start. I've also got The Quantum Age by Brian Clegg. I read this a while ago. It's a fantastic introduction to quantum physics. So if you're interested in things like, it talks about electromagnetism, the invention of the laser, a kind of historical look at the development of quantum physics throughout the 20th century, this is a great book. Now, if you're a fan of Richard Feynman, which I'm sure that many of my viewers are, The Meaning of It All is the transcripts of 3 of his lectures that he gave in 1963. 3 really interesting lectures and another quite short book, so relatively convenient to read. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, then you'll know that I just finished reading A Universe from Nothing by Lawrence Krauss. It's a good overview of cosmology, I think. It can get a bit technical near the end, but it's a really important book and I just couldn't not have it on my list. And if your interest in cosmology is specifically in the area of CMBR, then Afterglow of Creation is a good book sort of documenting its discovery. And finally for science, another book that I've read relatively recently, 7 Brief Lessons on Physics. I just wrote a review of this on my website, so you can go and read that if you want my full opinions, but a good overview again of sort of the history of science, just not specifically limited to cosmology. Oh, now this wasn't actually on my list, but I've just seen this one. I can't believe I didn't think of this. Paradox by Jim Al-Khalili. This is a great book. It's, I think, 709, it says on the front. This is a book of, well, this is the interesting thing. This is a book of 9 paradoxes which aren't actually paradoxes. For instance, the famous Monty Hall problem, I think, is the first one in the book. It seems to be a paradox, but it's not actually, and this explains it away. So I think it's got Olber's paradox, Laplace's paradox, the grandfather paradox, and sort of a scientific look at them, explaining how they're not actually paradoxes at all. Definitely recommend this one. Okay, finally, Bill Bryson, A Short History of Nearly Everything. This book is sort of a short history of nearly everything, really. Fantastic overview of different areas of science and how they were discovered and all this sort of stuff. You've probably, again, already heard of it, but I just had to throw it in the end of my recommendations. Now, just before I end the video, I thought I would mention the book I'm reading at the moment, which is Mullahs Without Mercy by Geoffrey Robertson. I'm only a tiny bit of the way through, so don't ask me what I think of it. If you want to keep up with the book that I'm reading at the moment, or want to know what book I'm reading at any particular time, I do have a Goodreads account. The username is Cosmic Skeptic, but I don't really update it amazingly well, but it should give you a sort of rough idea of what I'm reading at the time. Also, my reading list is absolutely endless, but 3 books that I've got on my immediate radar are these 3. The Little Book of String Theory, I've heard is quite interesting. I'm really interested in reading Infidel by Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and I haven't got around to reading Sapiens yet. Now, I've heard that this is supposed to be one of the best books of all time, and I've been meaning to read it for ages. I think this will have to be my next one, but if any of you have read any 3 of these books, do let me know what you think, as well as if you have any book recommendations for me or everybody else, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear the books that you guys have been reading too. But anyway, I hope this kind of covers it for everybody who kept asking. If you follow me on Snapchat, I usually sort of let you know what book I'm reading on any particular day. All the links to all of the 22 books that I've mentioned in this video will be in the description down below. You can follow me on social media here. I've been Alex J. O'Connor, or Cosmic Skeptic. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.